want to define pragmatic architecture in one sentence or two sentences, what would it be? Can you tell us more how you apply the pragmatic architecture in your approach? Any advice you can give to young architects?
Correct your attitude and just push even the smallest opportunity you get. If you think it's really small, then you'll never do a good job. If you think it's the biggest opportunity, then you will. So yeah, that's my advice.
Today we are pleased to have the architect Gaurav Roy Choudhury with us. We will be diving into the topic of pragmatic architecture. First of all, thank you, Mr. Choudhury, for agreeing to take part in this interview to share your approach in architecture with our community of architects. So let's start. Can you introduce us to yourself and the type of architecture you do at Gaurav Roy Choudhury Architects?
Thank you, Victoria. Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here. And a little bit about myself. I'm an architect based out of Bangalore in India. And we run a small practice, small saying we take up a maximum of 7 to 8 projects at a point of time. And we basically look at creating architecture, which firstly, of course, is in the context of our country, India being the country that it is economical. That's something which is very important to us, is meaningful. It has to be meaningful and is detailed well. That is something which we believe in terms of architecture. And we're total. Our office is, I think, around 5 people. Each person works on one project, so there's a lot of effort. There's a lot of detailing. There's a lot of interactions with the clients. There's a lot of understanding or trying to understand the conditions, the context, in terms of what it allows us to do.
That's very interesting. Yes. So in our research and study of pragmatic architecture, didn't find a unified definition for what it is or what it isn't. So what is pragmatic architecture to you?
To me, I think pragmatic architecture comes deeply from the context where I am from. Being in India, we face a host of challenges which people in the West probably don't face. With a huge population of a country being or not having access to housing or even an architects for that matter. The idea of design, I think, is something which comes into question. And that's where pragmatism comes in. Economics, design, how do we put the same number of bricks in a different way? So those things come into my understanding of what architecture is. The context really plays a huge role because we are also kind of going against the grain of a country like India.
Based on the context in India, in your case?
In my case, definitely largely based on the context. We're always trying to, like the kind of architecture you see abroad, or you see in Europe, or you see even now in Southeast Asia and things like that the quality of construction, the quality of labor, the quality of education, the quality of all that is very different here. So it's a fight. It's a day-to-day fight to educate, to contextualize, to constantly orient yourself with regards to what you want to do and what you're building.
So can you tell us more how you apply the pragmatic architecture in your approach? You said something about it being cost-effective mainly.
Cost-effective is just one part, of course. Cost-effective obviously is just one part of it. It's not the main part. See, the idea here is the context. So, for instance, I'll just give you an example. So we've done this project, which is the Scaffold House, which is a renovation project. So in this, again, the very tight budget, very the scope of what you could do is very limited. So what you do is you try and understand how you can create the new with regards to the old. So you look at a far more kind of a violent kind of exercise rather than a progressive one, so to speak. So where the old comes in as a separate element, the new comes in as a separate element against the old, and the definition of the old is against the new. So what that does is it creates the contradictions show up, the contradictions of the old and the new, the contradiction of newness and oldness comes in, traditions come in, all of those factors. And of course, in the space itself, we always try to create show that violence, show that contradiction, show that dichotomy, so to speak, within the old and new spaces. So that is always our thing. Of course, emotion is one of the most, I might say, cost effective, but emotion becomes one of the most important kind of things we target as an architect, to drive emotion, drive the nuances which exist, the contradictions which exist, all of those things within the project which do.
Okay, so and it's all based on context. These contradictions arise from the context in which you're working and eventually, right?
Context, like I'll just give an example again. Context, like for instance, again, India in the last 20 years has seen a lot of development. Okay, a lot of people have made a lot of money, but a big majority of people haven't, in that sense. So our cities have become very expensive for the people, for the most of the people. Few people can afford it, most of the people can't. So our cities have, so the richer people kind of, and those are the people we go to, they're the ones who hire us as architects. So it's very important for us to educate and also talk about this, through architecture, talk about the fact that they're building farmhouses when most people can't afford one house, they have two houses, So through architecture, we contextualize these ideas. We talk about, we break down romanticism, we break down the ideas which we hold dear, in our architecture. So there is brutalism, there is an education process, and our architecture, I think, forms in those currents, of these different things. So cost is very important. I will never ever make a very jazzy building. I won't with Italian marble and this. I won't, because for me that's very important. So materials do play a part, of course, but the architecture doesn't necessarily come out of materials. Materials just become the agencies which express what we want to kind of express.
Okay, so so you basically, is there anything when it comes to materials? Is there a specific material that you focus on mainly? Is it based on the location, or?
I mean, we don't give too much importance to materials in that sense. We look at what we're trying to do. If we are loading an old building, like the renovation project which I talked to you about, with a new part, we try to keep it as light as possible. That's why we use steel there.
Okay.
So we use and we use steel. We don't go to ISMBs and ISMCs and solid steel sections. We look at hollow sections, and we try and see how do we get the strength out of the lightest structures as possible. So everything comes out from that. Everything comes out from. So materiality for me is like the main thing is a script which comes in from every project: context, clients, requirements, what we want to do, what the philosophical questions in that project are, and that's the main script. And the material become the actors who play the characters, so to speak, of that script. So materials can change here, there, that doesn't matter, but the script becomes the most important thing.
And given all your experience, is there any advice you can give to young architects that are just starting in architecture?
The biggest advice which I would kind of like to give, and we face this every time, because we have a lot of people coming in and out of our office, and it's the same thing, which how do you take something seemingly boring and question it so much where it becomes interesting? And how do you peel out the interest, peel into the interest? So that becomes very important in terms of how it informs your architecture. So I've started from again, of course, 20 years back, but I started from a city where I wasn't from. So I'm in Bangalore, but I'm not originally from the city. Usually it's much easier to practice where you've grown up because you know a lot of people and etc. So I started from the absolute base, and the kind of projects you get are really small and tiny and this and that. But if you take every opportunity and do the maximum it offers, of course you can't do a lot when you have no work to show, but whatever you get, you kind of maximize that. And I think that's the most important thing which you need to do as a young architect, is correct your attitude and just push even the smallest opportunity you get. If you think it's really small, then you'll never do a good job. If you think it's the biggest opportunity, then you will. So yeah, that's my advice.
Okay, so look at the small things around you, and you can always be inspired by them.
Absolutely. And if you question anything, you question, you keep on questioning. It's like, okay, why is this like this? Why is this like that? It'll automatically develop. In fact, your opinion on the matter, what is before your questioning and probably your opinion after questioning, are usually very different. So I think that's the key to look at how you practice. And of course everyone does it in their own way, but this becomes very important, where you look into a small factor. So we've done factories in which we have looked at the processes of the factory, which is extremely practical, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
A factory is as practical as it can get, but we've actually looked into the process and found problems in them. And as an architect who's just now maybe familiar with the processes of the factory, I've been able to suggest things to the factory people who've been working on that industry for many years, which have been able to actually make the process far more creative within the factory itself. So you can get in that creativity in, you can get in the ideas of you can get, like, again, in a factory in India, what in Europe is kind of termed as sweatshops to some extent, because you have the workers and then you have the staff, and this huge difference between the workers and the staff, all of that. So we've tried to create factories where we've blurred those lines. We've blurred those lines. We've tried to create ownership of the workers working in that factory. We've tried to scale the buildings down so that they're not intimidating, because that's what sells today, right? Intimidating architecture. So how do we scale it down? How do we make them feel as if they're part of a bigger thing? How do we make them not feel lost, but part of a community? How do we make them be able to walk through every single part of the factory without feeling that, okay, I'm not allowed here, I'm not. So those things become very important in terms of understanding architecture.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, so one last question. If you want to define pragmatic architecture or pragmatism in architecture in one sentence or two sentences, what would it be?
Pragmatic architecture as an attempt to address and recognize problems or bridge problems through creative, philosophical, and spatial means. And that's for me is what architecture is. So where you can actually kind of change something right at the start, at where it starts. You can go and change something where the problem lies. Most people don't change things where the problem lies, right? That's the biggest thing which happens. So that's, I think, what pragmatism is going to the crux and touching it, and touching the nerve, because a lot of things don't happen. unless you do that.
So it's not just the architecture or a movement in architecture or an approach. It will vary based on the problem each time, which will create a very different type of architecture every time.
Altogether. I'll give you an example. There's a person who came to us to design a mall.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and malls, I mean, I don't know how it is in Italy, but malls in India also aren't doing too well, you know. And in India, the malls have always been symbolic of exclusivity, of the rich people going in, you know, these air conditioned, and the country is quite hot, so air conditioned spaces are only for the rich people to go in, and it's all about expensive things which you get, etc., and build exclusivity, and all of these malls over the years have been declining in terms of business, in terms of all of that over the period of time. And so he came to me and he wanted a mall, and I said, why are you making a mall? You know, let's try to build something in between. You know, let's try and build something in between. Let's try and build a hybrid space. Let's try and build something which can become a yoga studio in the morning. It can become something else in the evening. It can become something else. So build something which is far more porous, far more which gets everyone together, which can change for night, day. It looks at wastage, looks at the sharing economy. It looks at all of these processes, you know, where it becomes a platform for that, so to speak, you know, because malls, half the shops are not earning any money. So this is something which we did, and we managed to convince him. Okay, and that's one of the most successful buildings which is there in Bangalore at the moment, you know, in terms of earning money. Because sometimes our ideas are, okay, rich is where the money is. No, but it's not the case. You know, it's really not. If you break down the boundaries, if you make a space which is more accessible, which is everyone wants to be there, your earnings will automatically increase.
Okay, so creating inclusive spaces that will eventually work more than just going with what we're usually accustomed to, which is a mall is an exclusive space which only the rich can use. And
right
now it's a successful space. So when you see this space, do you feel like the rich, or now that it's inclusive to all types of people, it's more of a successful space and there's more profit, right?
Absolutely. It becomes more democratic. It becomes more democratic. It becomes more insular. It becomes more plural as a space. And that's where, you know, that's plaguing our country a lot, especially because we have a huge disparity, which I told you, you know, at least in Italy, everyone's roughly in the same bracket to some extent. But in India, the disparity is so big. So it's 80% of the population is living in a different world, and 20% of the population is living in a different world. So both the worlds are not real, you know, in that sense. So there's a sense of surreality in everything which comes out. And so that's basically what we are trying to approach, even in our buildings, in our houses, where a person wants to build a farmhouse somewhere away from the city. We make it very conscious that, okay, listen, farmhouses, oh, I want to get connected to greenery. I said, okay, how do you do that when you build a farmhouse? Because you're cutting greenery to go there and build this. So we make it very clear to them. We make it very clear that this is not a farmhouse. I'm sorry, it's not a farmhouse. It's a notion from your romantic ideas, you know, which you're trying to reconnect with. So our architecture also is honest to that approach. So we will try, and yes, it'll be beautiful, it'll be natural, it'll be this, but it'll be surreal. It'll have its own rules. It doesn't apply to the rules outside. It is a microcosm in itself, you know. So those things become very important in the way the architecture expresses itself.
Okay. Thank you so much again, Mr. Choudhury, for telling us more about your type of architecture that you practice and your pragmatic approach in architecture. We always like to have inspiring architects such as yourself. Thank you so much.
Thanks. All right. Okay.